in per capita income now is $2,800, and that puts it in the LMIC category, low middle income, and that goes up all the way up to 4,400
Yeah.
USD.
Yeah.
The upper middle income category has the biggest band from 4,400 to about over 14,000.
Yeah.
So at best, if we grow at 7% per annum over the next 24 years, we might will achieve no more than $14,000. That's, I mean, 33% less than the UK is today. And UK is one of the sort of poorest countries in the
Yeah.
OECD. So, so we have to remember this, that it doesn't make us Viksit Bharat. India can remain, can be at that level, can reach a high income status only if we grow on average for 24 years at 8%. Now, no international agency, OECD, World Bank, IMF, projects that our growth rate will be more than 6.5% in this decade. Now, that's simply not good enough to either become Viksit Bharat, nor is it enough, anywhere close to enough, to generate the 10 to 12 million new non-farm jobs that we have to generate.
सर
And
ये
let me
साल
just
का जो फोरकास्ट
summarize.
इंडियन गवर्नमेंट का है दैट इज 6.5 to 7%. मतलब दे आर आल्सो नॉट प्रिडिक्टिंग
That's
8.
where we are growing. That's
जी
where we are currently growing.
जी
But I'm saying that the Indian government's forecast is only close to what the World Bank, IMF, etc. are saying.
जी
And I'm saying that's not good enough to generate the jobs, nor is it good enough to make India a, a high income country. The vast majority of Indians don't understand this. Even the literate, educated Indians don't know this. So I think this is one thing that they need to understand, that a low income country, so low middle income country like ours, needs to grow much faster than it has been. One, and if this growth is to be both sustained and inclusive, in other words, bring up a lot of the
yeah
bottom 50-60%, then it must grow at 8%. What India has managed to achieve in the last 30 years of 6.5% on average has created deep inequality. We cannot continue to live with this inequality. We've created joblessness on a scale unprecedented in our own history. And the result is that there are three groups who are waiting to be employed. One is those who are currently unemployed, and India was at its peak unemployment rate, even by government standards, in 2017-18, and the open unemployed, 83% of whom are youth between the ages, 15 and 29, must be employed. That's a stock of unemployed. The second group are those young who are joining the labor force each year looking for work. That's 6 million per annum. So that's a continuous flow who have to be absorbed. 6 million, and they are, because they are better educated, they must be absorbed in non-farm work, as have to be as have to be those who are in farming. Now, India, the structural transformation has been very slow. Uh, so you have 45% of our total labor force of 570 million in agriculture. That needs to drop to no more than 25 to 30% from 45, because those in farming are at too low productivity. The majority of them are doing nothing. And worse still, this government's policies, especially the badly designed lockdown, sent 60 million additional workers to agriculture. So, all these people have to be pulled out of agriculture, given non-farm work. And the budget has, for the first time in 10 years, this government's budget is now talking about jobs. but what it's offered this time is just not good enough. Ji.
सर, ये जो स्टैंडर्ड्स हैं वर्ल्ड बैंक के, टू बी डेवलप्ड कंट्री यू हैव टू बी मोर देन $14,000 पर कैपिटा, तो जो प्रोजेक्शंस आपने बताए हैं, द हाईएस्ट प्रोजेक्शंस जो मैंने देखे, मोस्ट ऑप्टिमिस्टिक, उसके मुताबिक इंडिया विल गेट अराउंड $20,000 पर पर कैपिटा इनकम इन 2047। लेकिन ये जो बेंचमार्क्स है दे माइट गो अप, वो 14 पे थोड़ी रुके रहेंगे 25 साल तक। और दूसरे
You're,
जो कंट्रीज
so
है,
you're
हाँ,
right. So that's problem number one. That I mean, currently the high income benchmark starts at 13,500.
जी हाँ,
I mean, I've just raised it to 14.
जी,
It's actually likely to go much higher. Point one. Point two, the projections that you are talking about
वो
are assuming that we will grow at 8% plus.
जी हाँ,
But I'm going by what the last 30 years have shown. And what this government does not, despite continuously talking about Viksit Bharat, doesn't tell you that we are going to be able to grow at 8% per annum on average.
जी हाँ,
What does that mean, Doctor? It means the following, that as we become richer, we'll grow slower. So this decade, we have to grow at nothing short of 9% per annum. Next decade, 2030 to 40, nothing short of 8% per annum. And if we did that, then we might just touch the threshold of the high income, because as you rightly said, the high income threshold will rise
yeah.
by then. And at, we can allow the growth rate to fall in any given year towards some, 13, 14 years from now, towards the time we get to 2040, but no more than it must remain at around 7 all the way to 2047 to get to the kind of number of GDP per capita at market exchange that you just talked about, 20,000. Otherwise, we are not getting there. I'm talking about compounding at 6.5, 7% per annum, which is what we've been achieving. And that's the problem. And if we have to grow at 8% per annum to generate on average, 10 to 12 million new non-farm jobs each year.
Sir,
And that's what makes the growth be inclusive and bring up the income levels of the bottom 50%, 60%.
ये जो स्कीम्स को मैं देख रहा था, सो फॉर एग्जांपल वन ऑफ द स्कीम्स ये है कि अगर आप किसी नए बंदे को एम्प्लॉय करते हैं, तो द गवर्नमेंट विल गिव यू 15,000 रुपीज फॉर द फर्स्ट मंथ, और तनख्वाह कैन नॉट बी मोर देन 1 लाख। यानी अगर आप किसी को 15,000 रुपये, द एवरेज इंडिया में इनकम इज अराउंड 22,000 रुपीज। अगर आप किसी ड्राइवर को हायर करते हैं तो उसको 20,000 रुपये देंगे आप महाना, तो पहले महीने की तनख्वाह में 15,000 आपको गवर्नमेंट दे देगी। तो आई डोंट अंडरस्टैंड कि सोच लिया आप कि मैं यूनिवर्सिटी हूँ या मैं कोई कंपनी हूँ, मैं 1 लाख हर महीना दे के किसी को क्यों हायर करूंगा सिर्फ 15,000 सरकार से लेने के लिए? आई डोंट सी वेयर द इंसेंटिव इज कि सरकार 15,000 दे देगी, ठीक है, मैं एक नया ड्राइवर हायर कर लूं, बट अगले महीने तो मुझे पूरी तनख्वाह देना ही है उसको। सो इफ आई डोंट नीड द पर्सन, then I will not hire the person. But if I really need a person, then whether there is a government incentive or not, I will hire that person. ये मुझे समझ में नहीं आया कि
मैं समझाता हूँ।
जी,
You see, there is certain assumption that the government is making that companies will hire or people will hire. And that is fundamentally flawed or questionable assumption, because investments are high and new capacity is generated, therefore new jobs are generated, if and only if investment is right. Public investment as a proportion of GDP is barely 2% of total investment to GDP. And under this government, unfortunately, because of its economic policies, consumption has not been growing, and consumption has not been growing because jobs have not been growing. What you see is that overall investment in the economy or capital formation has never exceeded 31% of GDP in the 10 years. By contrast, between 2004 and 14, the investment rate never fell below 31%. It ranged between 31 and 38. That's the reason why new non-farm jobs were being generated, workers were being pulled out of agriculture, and construction jobs were really getting growing very fast, and the farm workers were getting absorbed there. Manufacturing also was growing. But unfortunately, this government's 10 years of policies and policy induced mistakes, policy induced shocks to the economy have resulted in fewer non-farm jobs being generated than in the preceding period, and the investment rate has not risen. And consumption, private final consumption expenditure, is, is, is of course growing, but it's growing at only half the rate at which the GDP growth rate is claimed to be. The GDP growth rate currently is claimed by the government to be 8% in the last 2 years, but consumption is growing at only 4. Now, normally it should grow at more than
Yeah.
the growth rate of the GDP if it is to lead to uh, the, an increase in investment rate. Investment, you see, companies are not investing; they are making reasonable profits by earning by keeping wages stagnant, and we have evidence about that. In the last 10 years, wages have been across the sectors been stagnant. So they're producing less, they're keeping their price high, so they're earning enough profit. A lot of those profits are being plowed into uh, taken abroad or being put into the stock market. So companies, although they are being exhorted by the finance minister repeatedly, please invest. Well, investors don't behave like that. When you either beg them or threaten them to invest, they invest in response to growing demand. Growing demand means growing consumption, but growing consumption depends entirely upon growing jobs. That's why I'm saying, and whatever schemes they've come up with, whatever for MSMEs or the ones you were describing, are simply going to be insufficient to raise consumption and demand. And that's the nature of the crisis this our economy is in. Because we also know that exports, uh, services exports are doing reasonably well, but merchandise exports have not done so well.
Mm.
So, I mean, the two big sources of demand are international sources in the West state, and I just said private final consumption expenditure is relatively stagnant, and export growth has slowed, of merchandise exports in particular. Under the circumstances, um, there's an international as well as a domestic tepid demand.
सर मैं पिछले 1-2 महीनों से आई हैव बीन कीपिंग एन आई ऑन द चाइनीज इकोनॉमी एंड व्हाट इज
So do I.
व्हाट इज इंटरेस्टिंग इज कि जो अगर आप किसी भी वेस्टर्न इकोनॉमिस्ट से पूछें कि चाइना का क्या मेजर प्रॉब्लम्स हैं, सो दे विल आइडेंटिफाई डोमेस्टिक कंजम्पशन इज डाउन, नंबर वन, इन्वेस्टमेंट्स आर डाउन, foreign direct investments are also down, youth unemployment is up. ये चार आइडेंटिफाई कर रहे हैं एज सम ऑफ द फैक्टर्स दैट आर कीपिंग द चाइनीज इकोनॉमी डाउन, इसलिए उसका ग्रोथ रेट हैज गॉन डाउन बिलो 5%. लेकिन ये चारों इंडिया के साथ भी यही प्रॉब्लम्स है. Youth unemployment, the more
Yes.
educated they are, more employed. Domestic consumption growth is only 4%. और उसके बाद इन्वेस्टमेंट्स और ऑल्सो लो, प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स भी नहीं आ रहे हैं. अगर आप फॉरेन डायरेक्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट देखें, सबसे ज्यादा जो आ रहे हैं इंडिया में वो मॉरिशियस से आ रहे हैं. एंड आई सस्पेक्ट कि वो धंधे, मतलब इट इज पीपल लाइक अदानी एंड अंबानी हु आर गोइंग एंड इन्वेस्ट. investing from Mauritius back into India. So it's not,
round tripping.
हाँ,
It's round tripping.
so it is not genuinely foreign investment. वो इंडिया का रीराउट करके टैक्स evasion schemes हैं. So the only difference is कि India has a higher growth rate than China's and more than the rest of the world. तो मुझे लगता है कि ये high GDP growth rate is hiding इंडिया के economic problems from the public.
Correct. Your understanding is correct. And although our growth rate has become higher than China's in the last 2 years, the fact of the matter is that's there's on account of two reasons that has happened. One is that, as you explained, Chinese growth rate is fallen, and in addition, we have recovered. Our economy has recovered from the contraction of
COVID.
FY 2021
Yeah.
rather well. Having recovered, the recovery is makes us grow faster and faster than other countries or major economies of the world. But the point is, for the last 20 years, India has been the second fastest large economy in the world after China. So it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that we've exceeded them. That's neither here nor there, because they are already knocking, China is knocking at the threshold of the high income category. Their per capita income at market exchange rates is $13,500. In 1 or 2 years, they've already been in the high HIC category of countries, while we are stuck at LMIC in the LMIC category with a growth with a growth pattern which is similar not to China's but to South Africa and Brazil, which makes our economy much more unequal. And South Africa and Brazil are stuck in the upper middle income trap. So best case scenario at 7% without inclusive growth, India will enter the upper middle income trap. I mean, we will be lucky if we grow fast enough, at 7% and even get there in 20 years, 25 years. But that requires a change in strategy. And we're not seeing that change in strategy under this government, nor in this budget, despite a new found focus on MSMEs and to some extent job creation. Because I don't think this government has a roadmap for making us Viksit Bharat, meaning from how are you going to get from point A, which is 2024, to point B, which is 2047, which is Viksit. There is no roadmap. There is no organization, institution in the country, unlike the Planning Commission. Niti Aayog is not up to it. All Asian countries which grew very rapidly, I'm talking about Korea, Taiwan, China, they had 5-year plans. We've abandoned 5-year plans some 9 years ago, and we have become the only Asian country which doesn't have a planning commission like institution. Not even in South Asia is there one country without a planning body. And this is unfortunate, which really goes to prove the point I'm making कि वो रास्ता कौन सा है जो हम अपनाने वाले हैं
Yeah.
आज और अगले 20-25 साल में जो हमको विकसित भारत बनाएगा.
मार्गदर्शन के लिए कोई इदारा नहीं है. दैट्स द पॉइंट. सर, एक लास्ट सवाल है मेरा ये. मैं अभी आई वाज लुकिंग एट ग्रेट ब्रिटेन, ये इमिग्रेशन इलेक्शन कहते हैं, आप तो जानते हैं. And I noticed that they did have their census in 2021 in spite of COVID. हमारे पास सेंसस अभी तक 2011 से नहीं हुआ है. सो ये जो पर कैपिटा जीडीपी का कैलकुलेशन वगैरह जो हो रहे हैं, इज इट बेस्ड on some speculative number of the Indian population, or is it using 2000 projection, not 2011 data? क्योंकि
projection from 2011 data. Now this is a great tragedy, I think, for the statistical system of our country, because census is the basis for actually arriving at the sample sizes and structure of the sample that the National Sample Survey Organization does. Point one. Point two, if China, United States, UK could do it in 2021 in the middle of COVID, why could we not? Our teachers are the ones who are enumerators and who go out. Well, our teachers were sitting at home over that entire 2 year period because schools were closed. Honestly, if they had adopted the protocol, the Registrar General of India, the census could have been done, should have been done, because if it was that difficult, why could China, UK, and US do it at precisely that time?
मतलब इसे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रिक्वायरमेंट यूएस में तो डॉज नहीं कर सकते वो मतलब एवरीबॉडी विल स्टार्ट सुइंग द फेडरल गवर्नमेंट इंडिया में नोबडी सीम्स टू बी इवन आस्किंग मैं देख रहा हूँ कि जो डेटा आ रहा है लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन का अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट वगैरह वी विल नॉट हैव एक्चुअल पिक्चर ऑफ इट्स लाइक सेइंग कि आप डॉक्टर के पास जा रहे हैं आपका ब्लड सैंपल टेस्ट ही नहीं हुआ एंड द डॉक्टर इज ट्राइंग टू प्रिस्क्राइब मेडिसिन by guessing your cholesterol, by guessing your sugar levels. So this is also...
You're right. There's one dimension that your listeners must hear about, which is that it is said by those who understand the public distribution system that because the census has not been done, we are not being able to identify, or we're leaving out about 100 million people who are deserving to receive the rations under the PDS, whether it's free or not.
सर ये फाइनल क्वेश्चन है मेरा मैं ये मतलब क्या इस बजट से आप ये कह सकते हैं कि सरकार इज एटलीस्ट फाइनली बिगिनिंग टू लिसन टू सम ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम्स दैट हैव कम अप कि पब्लिक की बात सुन रही है ऑपोजिशन की बात सुन रही है एंड हैज ट्राइड टू मेक एन एडजस्टमेंट इन देयर इकोनॉमिक फिलॉसफी कह सकते हैं आप कि एटलीस्ट इट्स बिगिनिंग टू लिसन आई मीन वी कैन एंड इन अ पॉजिटिव नोट आपको ऐसा लगता है कि ये इट इज डूइंग द थूक पॉलिश
well yeah there is some adjustment because they have been bitten hard by the voters, by youth unemployed who voted against them in very significant numbers. Their vote share dropped.
Sir, thank you very much for such a thoughtful and मतलब ये तो बहुत ही serious मसला है and we can have more conversations on it, but at this time to be able to shed light on some of the critical issues जो इंडिया के इकोनॉमी को लेकर हैं so thank you very much Dr. Santosh Mehrotra साहब and on behalf of my listeners and viewers आपका सब बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया और जो देख रहे हैं आपको भी शुक्रिया प्लीज़ अगर आपने अभी तक कॉन्वर्सेशंस को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया हो तो सब्सक्राइब करें वीडियो को लाइक करें और बेल आइकॉन को ज़रूर दबाएं थैंक यू वेरी मच
खुदा हाफिज़ नमस्कार
थैंक यू